Welcome, everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast, where we take a prominent figure or franchise in the world of filmmaking and argue whether it's overrated or underrated. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, DeAngelis. He is, let's say, the L to my light. No, I want to be L. You can be light.
I'm definitely light between the two of us.
Yeah.
We don't need to get into that.
And we're joined by a very special guest today. She is a voice actress. She is an anime aficionado. It's Rebecca Chiara Marano. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Yes, Rebecca Chiara Marano. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. Rebecca, why don't you tell us about yourself?
I mean, you pretty much said everything. You know, I'm a voice actor, so I do a lot of anime, video games, animations, commercials, etc. I'm from New York, but I'm currently here in Dallas, and I love anime, so Death Note is definitely one of my favorites, and yeah, I'm excited.
Cool. So today we're talking about a movie that's pretty divisive. Actually, most people seem to hate it based on the research I've done. We're talking about the 2017 Netflix American adaptation of Death Note. Rebecca, it was your idea to talk about this when I pitched this podcast to you. Can you tell me a little bit about why you wanted to talk about this film?
So I know it doesn't exactly fit in with your standards of like, oh, overrated or underrated, because I don't think anyone really thinks it's overrated. I think most people, like you said, just don't like it, and it bothers me to no end that this exists. So that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I could do a whole TED talk of like everything wrong with this adaptation.
Okay, good. Well, we'll give you that platform today, hopefully.
Woo.
So let's start with talking about Death Note. Dylan, you just informed us before we started recording that this manga came out in 2003, so it's fairly old. And then it had an anime adaptation that was pretty popular in both Japan and here in the States. And it's gotten various adaptations since then. It had live action films in Japan. It's had several spin-off novels. It has a musical concept album and stage production that was only put on in Japan.
And London.
But they are doing an American production, right, Rebecca? And you're in that?
Mm-hmm. They're doing the first, it's not the official one, but it's the first one that has permission to be on the ground in the U.S. And it's going to be in Dallas, Plano technically, but Dallas, Texas. And I play Misa.
That's very exciting and cool.
Yeah, it's real cool.
Yeah, it sounds official to me. So we'll ask you more about that, I'm sure. And then eventually it had this adaptation, this infamous adaptation. Netflix did it, directed by Adam Wingard, starring Nat Wolff, Lakeith Stanfield, and Margaret Qualley. Oh, and Willem Dafoe as Ryuk, which was actually pretty dope. People hate this. Rebecca, you hate this. Why don't you just tell us why?
God, there's not enough time in the day. But essentially, the way I describe it is people who have no familiarity with the source material, they just know the general idea of Death Note of like, there's a high schooler and he finds a notebook and you can write a name in it and that person dies. And then they just ran with that. They didn't do any research into like who each of these characters are. They were just like, let's place it in America. And so they literally changed every single character, and it almost seems like they're trying to make them the exact opposite of who they actually are in the source material. So it's very frustrating for real fans, because you're like, that is not who Light is, or that is not who Elle is, that is not who the dad is. Literally every single character is wrong.
Yep, that's a fair reason to dislike the movie. I like it. I'm actually maybe one of two shooters for this film. I think it's fun, but I agree that it is not like the source material at all. So we know Rebecca likes Death Note, the original source material, a lot. Dylan, what are your feelings? I know you've seen the anime. Were you a big fan of it back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not much of an anime person in general. You know that. A lot of people in our friend group are huge anime watchers, and that's not really my thing. I don't really watch a lot of TV in general. I'm more of a movie person. Watching a lot of a TV series is a big commitment. It's a lot easier to just watch a single movie. I did enjoy Death Note, though, as an anime. I really liked the fact that the protagonist is also like the villain of the series, which I think is an interesting twist that we don't see a lot in stories in general, and particularly like anime, which is generally like more geared towards children. And yeah, the fact that the anime itself it's a mystery that you already know the solution to. So you're watching another character trying to solve the mystery. And the whole thing is this like cat and mouse chase. And I think the movie like tries to do something similar with it to, varying degrees of success. I should say, like, generally speaking, when it comes to like adaptations, you do not need to adapt like one-to-one source material in order to make like a successful story, especially when you're adapting a series into a single movie. It's really hard to condense any sort of story into, 90 minutes, 100 minutes. So I don't think there's anything wrong with them taking liberties in, different aspects of the source material and kind of like moving them and twisting them. I mean, the most like major change that this movie takes from the original source material is that it's set in Seattle, which is not in Japan. And like culturally, there's, a lot of differences there. And they changed the characters' names around a little bit, right? His name is Light Turner. And was it Misa is named Mia? So they kept like relatively similar names. I think for the most part, I think the movie is like okay. I really like Adam Wingard. He's a horror director mostly. So you can kind of see that coming through in this film here, that he kind of wants to paint it a bit like a horror movie. And we mentioned it to each other when we were watching it, Jason, that it almost feels like Final Destination a little bit when you're watching it. And that if you look at it through the lens of this is like a cheesy, like gore horror movie, I think you can like enjoy this for the most part. I think that is completely twisted though if you're somebody that's like a giant fan of the anime and the manga, and you're stuck like dissecting every like minute detail that's in the movie and like noticing every single change. It's a very difficult way to watch like any movie adaptation, is like picking out the minor details that are changed and things, and that immediately like turns you off from the movie.
It's not minor, though. They're like major changes. It's not like, oh, well, he was wearing a blue shirt there and he should have been wearing a white shirt. That's my feeling about it.
So what are some of the major changes? I haven't watched the anime since like high school, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I can't say like off the top of my head like any of the major changes that, because like they've got like the big brush strokes down, right? That Light gets the death note from Ryuk, and then L is the detective tasked with hunting down Light. That's like that's the Spark Notes version of the plot of the anime. That is the plot of this movie as well. What are the major changes that happen though, Rebecca?
Literally, so you were saying that the major change is that it's set in Seattle. That doesn't even have to be that big a deal. It wouldn't matter if they just made it in America, but they kept all the characters the same. The biggest issue is that every single character acts the exact opposite as who they are. Because the whole thing about Light that's great about him is that he's super smart, he's super popular, and therefore he's super confident. This Light is like a weird outcast. He's very whiny. No one likes him for some reason, and he's honestly really stupid. He makes so many stupid decisions, and he instantly tells Mia about the fact that he has a death note because he wants to impress her and wants to date her. That is not who Light is. Mia, instead of being Mia/Misa, is supposed to be devoted to Light. She is pretty smart. I will give her that. I like Misa. I think she's smart, and the anime doesn't give her enough credit for that. But she's not this backstabbing, conniving girl that wants to get the book away from Light. She loves Light, which is not the same thing here. L is supposed to be calm and collect, and that's his whole thing. He's very smart, and he can figure all this stuff out. This L was so emotional and was making stupid decisions, reckless decisions. Again, I could go into more specifics about these things, but the main thing that you were saying was like, oh, it's the same brushstrokes. It's different because one of the biggest differences, I think, is how they portray how this whole thing and why this whole thing is happening. The reason that I think everything's happening in the anime is because Ryuk got bored. He just threw the death note down and was like, let's see what happens. But in the movie, it makes it seem like he chose Light. Specifically, he dropped it in front of Light, and then Light doesn't even do anything until Ryuk appears and convinces him to kill some school bully. Ryuk is supposed to be just a quiet observer, just seeing what happens with this book, but he's the one that kind of starts this whole game in action. He becomes this puppet master, which is not who he is. It's not why the whole movie should be happening.
Yeah, that is one complaint I've seen a lot, is like Ryuk as the kind of puppet master villain, whereas he's normally more like an observer, like the Watcher from the Marvel Universe. Yeah, I can see why they made that change. He's like a scary looking demon guy, and I think that they wanted Light to be a more sympathetic character throughout this movie, so they didn't want him to start his serial killer journey on his own. They wanted the demon to kick it off. I get that criticism. To me, I guess I didn't care enough about Death Note, the original series, to really mind the fact that they changed everything so much. I think seeing like an emotional L is fun. I think if you have like an actor of Lakeith Stanfield's caliber, you kind of want to get as much performance out of him as you can. So making him have that quiet anger and then having him burst out with anger was cool. I do think having him do a chase scene where he holds a gun and tries to shoot Light is a little bit much, but I enjoy watching that actor perform. So I thought it was great. I just like the sort of cheesy horror, American style horror of it all. Final Destination seems like a fun series. I haven't seen it, but based on everyone comparing this movie to it, I would watch those movies. Yeah, I just thought it was a good time. Rebecca, tell us a little bit about your background with the original series and, you know, what it means to you.
I love Death Note. I think I saw it in high school, and the thing that I loved about it is the fact that it's a psychological thriller. It's like you were saying before, Dylan, it's a cat and mouse game. You know, you already know you know who he is, and now you're just trying to see, can he get away with it, or what's going to happen? And it's constantly both of them playing 3D chess with each other. But the problem with the movie is that there is no cat and mouse game. Like, it's all, I think, you guys say horror. I think it's more action. I think this is trying to be an action movie, hence all the chase scenes, hence all the stuff. It's not really about outsmarting each other at all in this movie. And then the one scene where he does confront him, where it's almost like, oh, we almost get the Ellen Light moment where he's like, I know you're Kira. He's like, yeah, please make it stop. If you just, like, forget about all this, I'll stop killing. What?
That is like one major characterization difference that is interesting from the anime to the movie is that, yeah, Light, you know, he's like an emo, like nerdy kid in the movie, and because of that, he's not like super confident. And the Light character in the anime is like insanely confident. He's overconfident,
as he should be.
And he's like the coolest dude ever. Yeah. Which I think for the sake of realism, like the Light that we get in the movie is probably more the character that you would see like getting a Death Note is like the emo kid that everyone's like kind of afraid of in high school because he carries like a pocket knife or something like that.
American culture, we're so used to school shootings and the archetype of what we would expect a teenage serial killer to be. I think you have to make him like a social outcast, or you don't have to, but that's like what we've come to expect from our media.
Yeah, and I will say that I think the big miscasting of this film is Lakeith Stanfield as L. I think Lakeith Stanfield's a really, really talented actor. I like him a lot. I just think he's miscast in this. I think they should have gone with like a much younger actor for L. That's like the whole thing in the series is that he's like a kid genius. He's like super autistic. And he's like laser focused on finding Light. He's the ultimate detective kid, and they should have just did that in this movie too, instead of having L be like taller than every other character in the movie to the point where like he has to hunch over. It's just weird seeing him on screen the first time, where it's like, oh, that's like an adult man that is the detective. His like mannerisms just they seemed like off from. They were clearly trying to like match what he was doing in the anime. And I just don't think it like translated very well to the movie side of things.
I have a question for you about that. Were you talking about the anime when you said he's supposed to be a kid genius that's autistic? Or are you talking about the Netflix movie?
No, he's like a kid in the anime, right?
No.
Like
so actually, he's 10 years older than Light.
Oh, is he?
So he's just a little guy?
I think he only looks short because he hunches. I think he's like normal height and everything. And I don't think he's autistic either. I think that's one of the other issues with the Netflix version is they made him almost kind of autistic because that was the only rationale they could make for someone that acts that way. But I don't think canonically he's autistic.
That has a lot of like weird mannerisms, like eating candy and like squatting down and stuff like that.
Yeah, but again, that's his whole rationale is the reason he eats, well, actually, only the movies had candy, not the anime, but his whole reasoning for it is he's so smart, he burns so many calories that he constantly has to take in more caloric food, like sweets, and the whole thing with the sitting is like, this helps like the brain flow or whatever. So yeah, that was the rationale.
Yeah, I love Death Note. It's so stupid. This is like the idea that he eats cake all day and then he burns the calories by being a genius is so funny to me that I don't care that this movie is stupid. I think this movie being stupid honors the original source material.
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of like brushed past the whole concept of Death Note for anyone that hasn't watched this. Or isn't familiar with the source material. The whole idea is that this guy is given a book, and if you write a person's name in the book, the person dies. And you can also write the specific nature in which the person dies. but there's also like a shitload of more rules in the book as well. I don't know if that is something that is like also in the source material, that there's like 40 or 50 something rules. Seems kind of absurd. I feel like just writing people's names in it and that being it would make more sense. We talked about it when we were watching it, Jason, how like you can also control people up to 48 hours before they die, which seems way too OP and completely unnecessary.
They added definitely, so there were a lot of rules in the original Death Note. They don't showcase as many of them in the anime, but they added a lot of really weird rules in the Netflix one, which were annoying. Like the fact that you could like burn a piece of paper, you can only do it once, and that will save someone or whatever.
Yeah, that's like screenwriting stuff right there, where it's like, oh no, we got to write in that like they can't overuse this power.
I think canonically there's a Death Note eraser. Like, but you have to have the eraser if you want to save someone that you write in the Death Note. Yeah, there's a Death Note eraser. There's like other magic items from the Shinigami world that the Shinigami give out to humans. Yeah, I think that this movie has a level of camp that kind of matches the original anime. Like one of the original memes from the show was like, I'll take a potato chip and eat it, which is this scene where Light, he knows he's being watched by the police, but he still wants to use the Death Note to kill people. So he hides the Death Note in a bag of potato chips and writes names.
He hides the camera, the little TV that he uses to be able to know who to kill in the potato chips.
I see. Thank you. He hides the TV in a bag of chips, writes the names in the Death Note, and then to look not suspicious, he very dramatically takes a potato chip and eats it. You know, that's high camp. And I think that this movie matches that energy. I think it does honor the original in its own weird way. That's kind of
that is a major question I feel like we need to answer here then, because Jason, we're coming off the tail end of doing like 2 podcasts on Power Rangers. In the original Power Ranger series, the camp is the whole point, is that it's silly and it's intentionally silly. Now, Rebecca, maybe you can tell us, like, what is the intended level of camp in Death Note, and does the movie hit that intended level of camp? Or is the anime meant to be serious? Because when I watched it in high school, I remembered it, like, kind of coming off as pretty serious. I mean, obviously, like, the stuff that's going on in the series is pretty serious. Like, he's murdering people all over the place. So I feel like it's not as campy as Jason wishes it would be, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's pretty campy. They play tennis.
There's little bits of camp here and there, little bits of like humor that break it up. And everything they do, I wouldn't even say it's violent. It's not a violent show because everything they do is very stylistically done, which is also one of the issues with the Netflix one, is it makes it more gory, whereas the normal one is meant to be more stylistic. So there's little moments also of comedy in the show itself. Like, I think Elle makes a pun because Misa's like, I can't imagine a world without light. And he goes, yes, that would be dark.
That's good quality humor. I think this is one of those breakthrough animes that got really popular. And it was kind of like an alternative to the shonens that were kind of the only things that were mainstream at the time. Rebecca, what other like anime American adaptations have you seen, and how does this compare?
To be honest, I haven't watched too many of them, mostly because I know that Americans tend to skewer it. And the only reason I wanted to watch this one is because I love Death Note. A lot of times they tend to change the more action-y shows into American stuff anyway, so it kind of can work out. But I do know that the live-action One Piece is doing really well. So I think it just depends. You know, I think this one was just a little bit too outside of what American media is, so that it didn't really go over well. But I think if you take a typical shonen show, which we have action kind of things here, it can translate better.
Is there a Japanese live action Death Note adaptation?
So many of them, because it's not just this one Death Note. There's other movie versions of Death Note with like other people that happen to get the Death Note, or like the previous things that happened before Kira. There's a lot of them, and they're very well received.
Would you have preferred that this Netflix movie was like a totally disconnected story that was just using the concept of the Death Note instead of the Kira story?
Yeah, actually, that was going to be one of my suggestions I wanted to bring up. I agree with you. I don't think as a standalone movie, I think it could be okay if it didn't come from original source material. But if they really wanted to, like, still have the concept that came from this, they could have made an American version of it where it's a guy who's not Light that happens to get the Death Note and have all this stuff happen, and that would have been perfectly fine. It's only the fact that they tried to make these the same characters as existing material that so many people are upset with it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think it would have been cool to just like go more American school shooter with it and just say that these were completely new characters. Even to call it like a sequel to the original Death Note, I think it would have been fun.
Yeah, you do like you do like Easter eggs, like within the movie that are like only anime fans will pick up on.
They
Yeah.
did have one weird Easter egg. Like, they didn't go with a lot of the source material, but they had one Easter egg that almost makes me question if it was a coincidence. When they first meet L, Watari serves everyone like matcha ice cream, and that happened in the movie, and I was like, oh, okay. But then like they don't do any other Easter eggs or any other like true to concept thing. I'm like, all right, whatever.
That's funny that they picked just the one thing. Rebecca, did you ever read the special chapter sequel to Death Note? It came out in 2020. It's about this
Trump?
kid who gets, yeah, the one with Trump.
I haven't read it. I've been meaning to, but I know about it. And I'm currently trying to find a copy of the prequel, the one with Beyond Birthday, because that sounds really interesting.
Oh, I have that. I can send it to you.
Oh, yay! Thank you.
Yeah. So, for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, and this isn't super relevant to this discussion, but there is a single chapter manga that is a sequel to the original Death Note series where Ryuk gives a new Japanese high schooler the Death Note. And this kid does not want to use the Death Note. He knows better. So he auctions it online. And the person who buys the Death Note is US President Donald Trump. And there's a panel where Ryuk is handing the Death Note to Donald Trump. I'm not really sure what happens after that, but it's very funny.
It's like a story entirely crafted just so you can get that single panel.
It's so good.
People can meme it on the internet.
It's a realistic story because, to be honest, if everyone knew about this thing, that's exactly what people would do nowadays. Everyone knows about the existence of the Death Note, so no one would be stupid enough to use it again. They're like, hey, might as well make some money. And who's going to want to buy that more than, like, all the militaries?
Yeah. I guess it's a Japanese Trump criticism. I'm not really sure what the intent was when they made this, but it is very funny.
Does that happen at the end of the Death Note story? Like, does the general public become aware that he was using the Death Note?
Yes. So in the source material, Light does have to give up the idea of the Death Note. He lets it be discovered, but then it's a whole bunch of stuff that then you don't realize that he was the one who originally had the Death Note, and then he gets the Death Note back and whatever. So the public does find out about the existence of the Death Note. They just don't know who was the owner of the Death Note originally. They don't know who Kira was. It's complicated, but everyone knows it exists.
So the police that catch him, they cover it up afterwards? Or they cover up that it was him?
They don't know it's him. So again, it gets really complicated because that's kind of like mid-story. But Light realizes he's kind of being cornered, so he makes a deal to relinquish the Death Note, which will also wipe his memories, so that he knows that when this Death Note gets discovered, he can't really be held liable because he has no memories of it. There's no evidence that belongs to him. But he pulls a bunch of strings so that way, after they've cleared his name, being like, okay, we have the Death Note now. It doesn't seem like it's Light. He finds a way to be able to get that Death Note back in his possession. So now he's the owner of the Death Note again. People know it exists, but they don't think it's him.
Okay, but at the very end, the police do catch him. Like Matsuda shoots him, but those guys know it's him. And then do they cover it up at the end that it was him?
I don't think so. I think everyone knows that it was Light, but Ryuk's the one who ultimately kills him.
That's true. I really like that end sequence, and I think it's cool that my boy Matsuda got to cap him one time.
I mean, one thing I do think is kind of cool in the movie is that he's able to like write out these like extremely like elaborate series of events, including like other people being in specific locations, and like the guy like picks up the Death Note when it like washes up ashore, and then he has to go back to his house, watch the news, write down the names of all of the criminals in the Death Note, while Light is, inconspicuously like in a medically induced coma, to bring the have less heat on him. That kind of stuff is cool, and I feel like that we got a lot of that in the anime where like you were saying, like the calculation on both sides. And in the movie, there's not nearly as much about that. It's a lot more like teen drama stuff going on.
That's why you liked it, is because that's what it's supposed to be. That ending chain is like the only saving grace of like, this was the original Death Note. If we had had more of that in the actual movie, it might have been okay.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, oh, this whole Ferris wheel sequence is really contrived, and it's very much like a movie scene, but it's also like, oh, he wrote it in the Death Note, so that it has to happen now, apparently. I think one of the rules is like anything you write needs to be like physically possible. I wonder like what the limitations of that are.
In the anime, he explores it. He does a bunch of different experiments. Because I don't think Ryuk even explained that to him. Light was doing a bunch of experiments and a lot of killing before he even meets Ryuk. And one of the things he did was like, the president of France flies over to the US, or he dies of a heart attack in the US at like within 5 minutes. And obviously, because he couldn't get there in 5 minutes, he just died of a heart attack. So that's how Light learns the threshold and the boundaries of the
that is by far my favorite rule of the Death Note, is that if you don't specify the means of death, the default death is heart attack.
Yeah,
It's
makes
fucking
sense.
hilarious.
Yeah, I think it's pretty realistic, or as realistic as you can get as far
It's
as...
the number one killer of Americans, right? Is heart disease. So.
I think so. It's probably the same in Japan because they're really
everybody's
stressed
got a
all the
bad
time.
heart.
Yeah, that's rough. When you guys watched this, were you Team L or Team Kira? Watch the original show, not the movie.
Team Light all the way. I know not everyone feels that way. I was 100% Team Light. And that's what I also like about the anime is I know that you're kind of supposed to root for L for most of it, because some people think that he's more sociopathic Light, but it still leaves it up in the air. You still can like one or the other. The movie really just wants you to root for Light. And I don't like that doesn't give you that option.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's like a Walter White situation here, where you spend so much time with the protagonist that even though what they're doing isn't exactly right, you want to like be on their side. That being said, though, the movie kind of like makes that choice easier for people because it turns Mia into the main villain of the story,
and Ryuk,
which I don't think is a thing in the anime, right? She's just like a fangirl of Kira's.
No, she's his girlfriend.
Yeah, does she go to the same high school as him in the anime as well, or
no?
She's like a celebrity, isn't she?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I guess we could talk about Margot Qualley real quick. I think she's like might be the best casting outside of Willem Dafoe. She does a very good job at like being like a crazy bitch in this movie. Like she's got the crazy eyes, and even like early in the film when she's like kind of like excited about the killings, I'm like, oh, they're setting something up here.
Mm-hmm.
She's like a little bit too into it, and like Light is not super into it. Again, I understand that that's like completely out of character for him to like not be super into the killings. But like Light is never fully on board with things, and then when he shows like the Death Note to Mia, that's when he starts getting really into things because he's like, "Oh, this girl that I like, she wants me to use the Death Note. I guess I got to use the Death Note." Unfortunately,
it's so funny and it's so realistic.
It's very realistic to anyone who has been a boy in high school.
Yeah,
you know, like, you know the situation that guy's in.
He gives away that secret right away.
I know. Dylan mentioned that as well. Like, he breaks immediately. It's hilarious. But yeah, Margaret Qualley was great. I know she's a Nepo baby, but I think she's a very good actress. And this was the first thing I ever saw her in. And I was like, oh, she's probably going to have a career after this. And she did. Rebecca, what did you think? Yeah, as a fellow performer of the character Misa, what's your opinion on this one?
Yeah, I thought she did a good job. I honestly liked all of the actors. I thought all of them did a good job with the material they were given. I thought Margot did. It was such an interesting. It's an interesting take on Misa, but that's not her fault. That's the people who decide to make Misa a completely different person. So for what she was given, I think she did a really good job of portraying the character, even if you could kind of tell in the very beginning that she was kind of gonna flip on Light. But again, that was probably how she's written. So I think she did a good job.
Yeah, I think it's cool. It reminds me a little bit of the way that the Chani was handled in Dune 2 this year, where it was a character in the source material that is like directly tied to the male protagonist, and the main aspect that like makes that character the character is that they are like the love interest, right? And they kind of flip it a little bit and give that character more agency. Whereas like by the end of this movie, she's like completely detached from Light. She's cool with like just murdering him and taking the Death Note for herself. That's kind of interesting.
I don't think she ever, in this movie, I don't think she ever liked Light. I think she knew from the very beginning she was just going to use him.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid interpretation based on what we saw. But I don't know. I kind of like the like teen angst and teen romance elements of this film. I feel like they're not really there in the original, but you know, if you have a teenage protagonist, you may as well have some like coming of age elements, you know, have this guy's first relationship and see how it ends in a spectacular breakup. I love when they're fighting on the Ferris wheel. They really do just perform it as two teens going through a dramatic breakup and not two teens who are one is about to kill the other.
Mm.
I think it's a really cool and interesting spin on Death Note.
Mm.
And it's like doing things that I feel like would have been good in the original anime, kind of exploring the teenage side of the characters. Because, you know, why make him a teenager if he's just going to not act like that?
Because he's not. In the anime, you spend 2 seconds of him in high school, and then he goes to college. So he's not really a teenager like they made this movie him being. And Misa's actually 2 years older than him. So that's why they don't act like teenagers, because they're not.
I still think there's like elements of coming of age teen romance you can do like with a college student too. But I see what you're saying. He's a more mature character originally.
Yeah, I haven't watched the anime in forever. So you'll have to tell me, like, is there any parts of that story where there's like conflict between those two characters and the way that we see in this movie?
The closest thing is when Misa tries to do the best for Light, and then Light is like, just shut up and do what I say. So like there's moments where he just kind of wants her to follow his orders, and she's willing to do that, but sometimes it hurts because, you know, she loves him so much. But that's about the extent of which they fight.
Yeah, so I think this movie, I guess to its fault, you know, it takes away a lot of the Light versus L elements and makes like Light versus Misa elements. But I think it played out in some interesting and fun ways.
Though it's possible we see that in the sequel, right? Because this movie sets up a sequel, and I believe it's in development, right, Jason? Jason, did you look it up at all? Like,
yeah, so as of 2021, they announced that there would be a sequel to this, but Netflix also announced that they were doing a live-action television adaptation of this, being done by the Duffer Brothers of Stranger Things. I don't think both of those will get made. I don't think we'll get a live action show and a live action sequel, both from Netflix. So we'll see.
Yeah, and then Adam Wingard is he's working on Godzilla versus Kong movies. That's his like whole thing now.
He quit that. The last one was his last one.
He's the one they did this year.
Now. Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned the Duffer Brothers, because honestly, when I was watching this movie and I was listening to the soundtrack, I was like, why is it all 80s? And I'm like, They're trying to make it seem like Stranger Things. And that's what a friend who happened to watch, I forced to watch with me, was saying. He's like, this came out at the same time that Stranger Things was really popular. So you start to see all these homages to Stranger Things, not Death Note.
Yeah, like, this is a Netflix movie.
Yeah, all the music. And then the fact that they changed L's origin story. Like, he was just from an orphanage for smart kids. But they were like, oh, it's a government facility, and they put him in a vault or whatever. Like, no, he's not. Oh, what's his name? 11. He's L, not L11.
Right. Yeah, I didn't even realize the change was that big. But yeah, in the original, it's just like an orphanage for gifted children, and in this one, they're like government experiments.
Yeah, tortured government experiment kids, and it's like, what?
Yeah, that's stupid. Yeah, so we all have our opinions about this movie. Let's look at some of the critical scores and reviews. This movie has a 36% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's pretty bad. Certified rotten. The critical consensus says Death Note benefits from director Adam Wingard's distinct eye and a talented cast, but they aren't enough to overcome a fatally overcrowded canvas. New York Times wrote, feels rushed and constricted, but praised Wingard's direction focused on mood over mayhem.
Wow.
And then I got into a lot of arguments with people on Facebook, apparently, back in the day over this movie who did not like this movie.
Did you look up the Letterboxd score for this, Jason?
It's a 1.5, which is one of the
1.5 out of 5 stars
ever seen.
Oh my God.
One of the lowest I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, Letterboxd, it's really hard to get a score that low on Letterboxd. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because most bad movies have like shooters for it. Most bad movies have people who say it's so bad it's good, or I had a great time watching this, and those are my feelings towards it. But I am in the minority there.
No, but you are not of the opinion that this is a so bad it's good movie. You just think it's good.
I think it's pretty good. I think it's fun. Don't roll your eyes at me. Listen, I am loud and proud about my movie opinions. That's why we have this podcast. If I didn't want to say these things, I just wouldn't have a movie podcast. Here's something that I wrote. So one of my friends, Shane, who has also been on this podcast, he talked about Street Fighter with us. He wrote like a 3-paragraph essay about Netflix Death Note and how it's pretty good. Shane and I were living together at the time and we watched it together. And then he wrote a very long Facebook status. He said, it seems like people were expecting this to be the Dark Knight of anime adaptations, and it's not. But maybe it's the Spider-Man 1 of anime adaptations. It's not great. It's pretty corny. And Willem Dafoe gives the same performance in both. Then he said, TLDR, Netflix Death Note is a pretty okay movie. Please calm down, weebs. And this guy wrote, unironically using the term weebs on people who don't like an adaptation of a beloved franchise is lame. Don't be lame, Shane. And I wrote, found the weeb. And then there was 37 more comments in this chain of people arguing, not just me and this guy, but this guy was arguing with us that this movie is bad and that weeb is a slur. And eventually I had to walk it back a little bit because Shane didn't want us to be fighting. And then I said, we were talking about how weebs culturally appropriate things. But then I said, weebs may culturally appropriate things, but pop culture as a whole is give and take. The American Western genre wouldn't exist without the influence of samurai films. In turn, Japan took the concept of Westerns and created Cowboy Bebop. This brings me to my larger point. The Death Note Netflix movie is the height of cultural union. So how do you guys feel about that? As a bonding between America and Japan, this movie I view as maybe the first moment of peace since World War II. How do you guys feel?
Well, first of all, that guy on Facebook, he made the fatal mistake of using his actual face as his profile picture and not an anime profile pic. It's big mistake number one. You gotta always hide behind the anime profile pic. It keeps your anonymity. Yeah. That was the only thing I noticed from that exchange. I was like, oh no. You called him a weeb, and he's just like, he looks like me. He's just like a big white guy. And I'm like, oh no, that's a weeb.
Yeah, I do feel bad about that. Rebecca, what do you think?
So it's complicated because I do agree. I don't agree with the whole culture appropriation thing because I agree. I think we should be able to take things from other cultures and appreciate them to an extent. Because I do think that they could have used Death Note to inspire another type of media, like again with the whole samurai thing and the westerns to then that, but they weren't taking a western and then trying to recreate the exact western and pretend it was the same western but with different details. I think if they'd taken inspiration and not pretended it was the same story, it would have been fine. And I also think that because the fact that this person said calm down weebs kind of told me everything I needed. It just means that they are someone that doesn't know the source material, so they don't understand why people were upset about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so it seems like your main problem with this movie is just that it's like a really flawed adaptation of something that is special to you and that kind of stood on its own, and then they made a version of it that you think isn't as good.
It's just not it. It's not even like it's not good. It's just it's not. Other than the basic premise, it is not Death Note whatsoever. Again, as a movie itself, if I had never watched Death Note and I saw this movie, I could maybe understand that guy's reasoning, being like, it's not that bad of a movie, but it's when you're trying to base it specifically off of an existing property that it becomes an issue.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, so this movie has a 1.5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, which, like we said, is extremely low. I think it's the lowest we've seen on this podcast. So, Rebecca, this is the metric that we use for overrated and underrated. It's just like what Letterboxd says. And if you're arguing that it's overrated, you have to say it's even worse than 1.5 stars, which I think you can do. You really hate this movie. And then I'll be arguing that it's underrated. So I just have to say it's a 1.6 star movie or above. But Rebecca, what do you got? Why is this overrated?
Sorry, I'm so confused by the numbers. I have to say it's like a 5 then?
You have to say it's lower than a 1.5.
Oh, okay.
Like,
so like
just the
1.5 out of 5.
A negative 100. Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
And why it's overrated?
Yeah.
It's just because it doesn't stay true to the source material in any way. Not that it's like little details. It's none of the characters are true to who they are. So it's just kind of making a mockery of Death Note.
That's fair. Dylan, what do you think?
The argument for overrated, it's kind of tough because, yeah, it's a very, very low score. I mean, the argument you would make for it being overrated is that this movie makes like a total mockery of what is otherwise like well-written source material. and the fact that it is attempting to be a direct adaptation of that source material instead of being something that is like loosely tied to the canon of the anime and the manga, that it completely like bastardizes the characterizations of the main cast and the overall like central plot point of that it is a mystery and that it is a cat and mouse chase, and it is a constant like back and forth, you know, calculation off between these like super like genius level people, and it turns that into like a teen romance, you know, drama Final Fantasy film. Like it completely misses the point and misses the boat so outrageously that if you like the movie, you like it for reasons that are not Death Note related. You just think it's like a good movie that you find interesting, but like it's not because of the Death Note stuff. It's just because you like the direction, you like the actors, and you know the music and all that.
Yeah, I think that basically sets up my argument for why it's underrated, because I guess I do like it for outside of Death Note reasons. Let's see. I like the Final Destination style kills. I think that makes it like feel just like a fun, campy Netflix horror type of thing. I like the constant slow-mo Dutch angle montages it does set to 80s power ballads. They're just really ridiculous choices that I think does work and does service the story that they're trying to tell. I think that having Misa and Light just having this story about a relationship and then a bad breakup is kind of something that's more relatable, I guess, for American and probably all audiences than the regular story of Death Note about becoming a god. I think, you know, juxtaposing that story with just being a teenager in America is kind of cool. And mainly, I just think Adam Wingard knew what he was doing when he made this movie. He knew he was going to make a campy, silly version of Death Note. And I think he succeeded at what he set out to do, which to me is a sign of a successful movie. So I think that the people who are giving this like 1 star on Letterboxd are really, they're like, you guys coming at this from like the point of view of like fans of the original. Whereas I think that I try and view movies like outside of that realm. And so I just had a good time with this, watching this with my buddies. And yeah, I think comparing this to other anime adaptations done by America, like One Piece, I think the One Piece adaptation is phenomenal, but it plays it really safe. Whereas I think this one really swings for the fences. So I give it a lot of credit for that.
Is this better than the Cowboy Bebop show?
Probably. I didn't
This is also
watch that.
Netflix adaptation.
I watched 5 minutes of that show and I stopped watching it. So I gotta say probably is, because I feel like that one played it safe and was still not accurate to the original show. So it was just bad on both levels. Whereas this, I think, took some risks that maybe didn't fully pay off, but I still had a good time with. So, Rebecca, you're going to be in the Death Note musical, the first licensed stage production in America. I did some counting. It looks like there's been 3 other actresses who have portrayed the character of Misa before you. That's Shannon Chan Kent from the anime dub, Margaret Qualley from the film, and Adrienne Warren from the musical concept album. And you're number 4. So
Possibly
you are
5, because there's the London version again.
You're the 4th American.
Okay.
Unless they were an American.
Well, they were I think Canadian, the original dub actor.
Really?
I think so, because it was done in Canada, unless she's an American that went to Canada.
So you're the 3rd American. How's that feel?
Woo!
Tell us more about the project.
I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but essentially it's Death Note, and it definitely, the musical's a little bit different because obviously you can't put too much from the anime in there, and like, I don't know. I like all the songs. The songs are real bops. I don't know. It's a good show, and I enjoy it. And it keeps those same characters like you see in the anime. It's definitely more true to the anime than it is the Netflix version.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll try to see it. I don't know if I'll get to Dallas, but that would be really cool.
So what are some other animes that you guys think would be good for like film adaptations of them? What do you think would work?
Like an American live action version?
Yeah, I mean that's clearly like what Netflix is going for right now, right? They're trying to cash in on live action anime, specifically American adaptations. Like where do they go, you think?
Ooh, I would say one or the other, like either try to keep it as real as possible So like something super similar to the US. Like I would say the first show that people should watch if they're not into anime is to watch Erased, because it's very similar to the type of media we already have in the US, so it's easy to kind of digest. So that could be a really good one. Or like Jason was kind of saying, swing for the fences, do something super difficult, like superpowers or whatever. I love Hunter x Hunter. That is my favorite anime of all time. So that one could be a fun one if they really, you could go ham on that one, you know?
Yeah, I'm trying to think outside of like the shonen box, because shonen's like fairly easy. It's just like doing a superhero movie,
I was gonna
basically.
say, what is a shonen for people that don't know what a shonen anime is?
Shonen is typically like action manga for boys. So like Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, One Piece, those are all considered shonen. I think Hunter x Hunter would be as well.
Yes.
Um,
Not
So
Erased, no.
like My Hero Academia, is
that's a shonen. Yeah.
What about Attack on Titan?
That's probably a shonen. But I would say that Full Metal Alchemist is not a shonen, but it gets lumped
I
into
love Full Metal
shonen.
Alchemist. I would love to see a Full Metal Alchemist movie.
Yeah.
I think Full Metal Alchemist, and at least I think actually Attack on Titan might be seinen, which is meant to be, or seinen? I'm definitely mispronouncing it, for teens. It's a bit more of a mature audience than like young boy.
Yeah, both of those shows are a little bit more philosophical. It's still a lot of punching, but it's less about the punching and more about just like, I don't know, nihilism versus other philosophies. Those shows are great.
Because when I think of like Full Metal Alchemist and Attack on Titan, they're both like pretty like Western depictions in anime. You know, both like from like the styles of like their communities as well as the architecture.
Yeah, they're both like about Germany.
Yeah. I mean, Full Metal Alchemist, like, literally just, like, basically takes place in Europe. So I feel like that adaptation would be very clean to do for an American audience, as opposed to something like, I don't know if you guys have seen the Ghost in the Shell movie with Scarlett Johansson. It's not very good. So, most of the time these adaptations are more miss than hit. And from what I understand, like, even the Japanese live action films are generally not regarded to be very good either. I think it's just like, as a generalization, like animated stuff is oftentimes difficult to adapt into live action, just because the art style is such a huge part of like the draw for the this type of media.
Yeah, I feel like that's why Death Note should have been a slam dunk, right? Because they're not doing Kamehameha like laser blasts at each other. It's
there's
just
nothing
like,
too over the top going on.
It's two guys and one of them's writing in a notebook. But yeah, I think so. There are a lot of like animes, like you said, that feel very Western inspired to begin with. I've told Rebecca that my favorite is Full Metal Alchemist, and my second favorite is one called Baccano, which is about like 1920s gangsters in New York mostly. And then there's like a train robbery. It's like all set in America. And a lot of people have called it like an anime if it was directed by Quentin Tarantino. So I think that one would really lend itself to an American adaptation. And then my third favorite anime, I guess I'm just saying all my favorites should get adapted. But my third favorite is called Ouran High School Host Club, which is also not a shonen. It's just about a girl who joins a club of boys who have a club for entertaining women at their high school and making them feel loved and special.
I don't know how well that one would translate over, though, because there's such differences between American and Japanese culture, and also the fact that, like, it's a person who happens to dress as a boy, but they're not trans or anything, and people are gonna go at that.
Like, that would be huge in the culture war today if they made an American Ouran High School Host Club.
Yes.
I want that to happen even more now. But yeah, I think anything that's not shonen is what should be adapted, because like just having Dragon Ball Z done but with white people is not that interesting, whereas having some of this other stuff done but set in America, there could be cool spins on it, or it could be more faithful. But yeah, does anyone else have any final thoughts on the Netflix Death Note?
So you're saying the Death Note movie sequel should not have Donald Trump in it? They shouldn't just straight adapt the Donald Trump storyline?
I think it should. I think they should get him to play himself. You know, he's got an IMDb page from being in Home Alone 2, Lost in New York.
The only problem with, not the only problem, but one of the other problems with Netflix doing these sequels is that they still own the rights to Death Note, which is why we haven't been able to get the musical on Broadway yet. The only reason I'm able to do the musical is because it's a small community theater. It's not the official version. So as long as Netflix holds on to this title, we can't get the official musical of the US.
That's pretty annoying. Netflix should just film your production, do a pro shot of your show, And I think that would be a better adaptation than this movie. You should record it. I do want to see it, even if I can't make it down. But yeah, any other final thoughts on Death Note?
We didn't come to like a final verdict here. Look, if we're going off that like 1.5 out of 5, the movie's probably a little bit underrated just by that. I would guess that most of the very low scores are based on people that are looking at this as like a direct adaptation and a very poor direct adaptation. And listen, folks get emotional when they see, you know, source material that they hold in high regard, and they see that, you know, the director or the writers, they're taking liberties with the source material that they don't particularly like. It's understandable. However, this rating is like super low for a movie that is like fairly well put together. It's competently directed. I like the effects. I like the acting performances. I think like for the most part, like, you know, you could just like I could show this to my mom and she'd be like, oh, it's like a fun little movie. However, my mom doesn't know shit about the anime. So I think this is like one of those films that it all depends on like what angle you're coming into this and what is like your relationship with Death Note prior to this. I'm guessing that like this low rating on Letterboxd, there's probably a lot of Death Note fans that were like review bombing this or something like that. Because I'm looking at the rating breakdown and 30% of the ratings are half a star out of 5, which is just it's just like absurd. It's absurdly weighted in the negative compared to like all the other stuff we look at on that site.
Yeah, but the New York Times, they're not nerds, and they also didn't like it.
Well, they wouldn't have given it a half a star. They said it feels rushed and constricted, but they did like the direction. Rebecca, what do you think? Do you think, knowing the score for this movie on Letterboxd being so low, do you think maybe it's a little underrated, or are you sticking with your guns that it's overrated?
Sticking with my guns, because you went after it. They only got this popularity by using Death Note's name. So if you're gonna use the name, you have to actually stick to the material somewhat. You can make some changes maybe and take a risk, but it is nothing at all like the source material. So
I'm curious, would you recommend this movie to somebody who's never seen the anime before?
Okay, so interesting story. When I first watched this movie, I watched it with a friend of mine who also knew the source material, and her roommate who had never seen the movie. So she liked the movie, and that's the thing. People will like the movie if they've never seen the source material. They might, they may not. But I wouldn't recommend watching this to someone who hasn't, because then when you watch the real material, it's so much better. And that's what we did. We showed the roommate the real material, and she went, oh, this is like 1,000 times better. So like, yeah, you could show it to someone and they'll enjoy it, but why would you give someone like something meh when you could give them like something great?
Yeah, that's fair. All right, cool. Well, I think that's our thoughts on Death Note. It sounds like none of us are going to change our minds about whether this is overrated or underrated.
I think I gave it like a 2.5 out of 5. I'm like Switzerland in this conversation. I think it's fine.
Yeah, that's Death Note. So thanks for watching, everyone. We're the Over Under Movies podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your pods. We put our videos up on YouTube. You can follow us on TikTok. Check us out on Patreon if you want to support us, give us money. We would love that. And you can join our Discord if you want to have fun conversations like this with us and see how we review movies on Letterboxd. You can do that. It's a good time. But that's going to be it for this week. See you at the movies.
Bye, everybody.